Today, in the front page of the arts section of the New York Times, is one of the most repugnant articles I've ever read in an American newspaper. And the title of it is, "Suddenly the Cold War is a Cool Event." What follows is a review of an electronic game made for children called Black Ops, which is based on the Cold War. And I want to read you a couple of sentences of what the reviewer says. He says he can't wait to play this game again. "I wanted to try to assassinate Fidel Castro during the Bay of Pigs invasion again, and break out of a Soviet prison camp in the Arctic again, and pilot a gunboat through the Mekong Delta again, shooting sampans. Black Ops, the name of the game, glistens with such moments. The Cold War was never so much fun." That's why we need teach-ins like this to remind people that the words fun and Cold War don't go together. The word fun and McCarthyism don't go together. So I want to begin by just sharing a couple of personal anecdotes about McCarthyism. Then I want to tell you what McCarthyism was not. And then I want to tell you what McCarthyism was, in short, and then end by a very quick summary of what McCarthyism has meant to my country. My first acquaintance with McCarthyism was when you might say, was when I went to college in 1962. I came from a small Republican farm community in Michigan. My parents were totally apolitical as far as I know, except maybe voting. But when I went to college, my mother had one piece of advice for me. So, in fact, it's the only piece of advice I ever remember her ever giving me. She said, "Don't sign anything." I had no idea what she was talking about. Really, I had no idea. Later, I realized what she was talking about, that this totally apolitical person from a Republican rural Michigan could be afraid of having a political opinion. Well, with the rebelliousness of youth, of course, I signed everything and joined everything, and this was the 60s. And before long, I became chair of the Detroit Committee to End the War in Vietnam. And we were trying to raise money to send student buses to Washington to a demonstration. And somebody came up with the idea that we should go to Solidarity House, the UAW headquarters in Detroit, because somebody had heard that Emil Mazie, the Secretary-Treasurer of the UAW, was against the war. So we went down there, a friend, Peggy, and I, 19-year-olds or whatever we were. We went to Solidarity House up on the 7th floor or wherever, and had an appointment with Emil Mazie, but he couldn't see us. So he shunted us off to his secretary, a guy named Sam Fishman. And it turned out Sam Fishman had no interest in our group, no interest in giving us money to send buses to Washington, no interest in our opinion on the war in Vietnam. He only had one question: how many of your group are communists? Of course, ironically, what Sam didn't know and what I didn't know is that the woman who was accompanying me was a red diaper baby, actually. The point of this is that McCarthyism, as virulent as it was, didn't really totally crush us, and the new left rose out of the ashes of McCarthyism very quick. But I want to tell you another story. When I went to graduate school, my roommate was from Chicago, and he told me a story that obviously impressed him in his youth. And he was a red diaper baby also, and he said that he remembered in 1953 when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed. And thousands of people were cheering outside the White House, and the news came over the radio while his mother was driving. And his mother pulled the car to the side of the road and cried. And then he went home, and his father was in the backyard burning his Marxist books. That also was the effect of McCarthyism. Well, when we talk about McCarthyism, the short definition is that anti-communist attack and repression that occurred from about 1946 to 1960. It was named after a U.S. Republican senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, who came to national prominence in 1950 when he made a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia. And he said, "I have in my hand the name of 205 communists who are part of a spy ring in the State Department." McCarthyism as an anti-communist phenomenon, however, started before McCarthy, started in 46, and lasted after McCarthy. McCarthy died of alcoholic poisoning about 1956, but McCarthyism went on until the early 1960s anyway. Now I just want to mention three things that McCarthyism was not. First of all, McCarthyism was not a campaign against communist espionage and sabotage. It may seem ridiculous to have to say that to this crowd, but we should remind ourselves that was the ultimate rationale, you might say, of McCarthyism. That is, McCarthyism was based on the two big lies. The first big lie was that after World War II, the U.S. faced a Soviet Union which was aggressive, expansionist, and wanted to take over the world. That was absolutely preposterous. The Soviet Union's policy was always based on peace, and after World War II, they'd suffered 30 million casualties. 1/3 of their country was destroyed, 1/3 of their cities, 1/3 of their factories. They were not about to be an expansive nation, even if it was if peace wasn't in their ideology. The second big lie was that the American Communist Party, by supporting the Soviet Union, were actual or potential saboteurs or spies. This also was a big lie, and what could be said about this except in the 15 years between 1945 and 1960, with thousands of FBI agents combing the country, thousands of military intelligence agents combing the country, congressional investigations, and local red squads, not a single act of sabotage or espionage by communists was uncovered. Not one. Now, it's true the Rosenbergs were accused of passing secrets to the Soviet Union and were tried and convicted and executed for that. But remember that that occurred before 1945. Even whatever secrets were passed, it was before 1945. There was not a single act of communist espionage or sabotage. And yet that was kind of the underlying, the kernel, the rationale for this entire anti-communist campaign. The second thing that McCarthyism was not was something that was an aberrant, one-off kind of behavior. I mean, what we have to remember is that there's a great fear that exists in all class societies. And it's always just beneath the surface, and that is that the exploited are going to rise up and take the property from the exploiters. This has existed in bourgeois society since the French Revolution. In the American slave South, they said that the fear of slave insurrection was ubiquitous, and it's been the same in capitalist society in the United States. Periodically, this fear breaks out into repression, and usually after some kind of mass movement. In 1886, after 600,000 Knights of Labor went on strike, you had the Haymarket, so-called Haymarket Massacre, and the execution of 4 labor leaders in Chicago, including the great leader Albert Parsons. In 1917, when the IWW went on strike in the woods and mines in the West, there was a Red Scare that demolished the IWW, and sent Eugene Debs, the socialist leader, to prison. In 1919, after the Great Steel Strike of 1919, there were the Palmer Raids and the Red Scare of 1920 that led to the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti. And after the sit-down strikes of 1936-37, there was the first HUAC investigation of 1938. So this Red Scare that came after World War II was not unique. It was not new. It was just the most protracted and dangerous that had ever existed. The third thing that McCarthyism was not was not in its essence an irrational hysteria. An irrational hysteria that stemmed from status anxieties. Well, why would we even have to say that? The only reason we'd have to say that is because bourgeois sociologists like Seymour Martin Lipset peddled this idea in the 1960s, that McCarthyism really came from American populism. It came from the people. It came from a kind of democracy gone wild. It came from the middle class that was losing its status. But this is fundamentally an error. McCarthyism did not come from the middle class. It did not come from the masses. It came first and foremost from the elites in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and the Catholic Church and in the business community.